Hey everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of DnD Horror Stories. In today's video, we have a story about a player that doesn't get their way, so makes an outrageous claim. A tale about a player being too liberal with TNT, and more. But first, a very important message from Nipsey.
Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I really like this toy.
Thanks, Nipsey. Now let's get into the RPG cringe. Player demands meta-knowledge and accuses me of kidnapping. By Reddit user Chaotic Muse X. This happened quite a few years ago at a Vampire The Masquerade LARP. The setting was Sabbat. Myself and 3 friends were playing Inquisitors, essentially the hunters of the profane and those that make pacts with infernal entities. A brand new player integrated herself into the local LARP circle and voiced interest in playing, so we encouraged her to make a character and join our pack. We'll call her Kathy. Without writing a small novella for background, this player was unique. She had a habit of describing her combat actions in such intricate detail that the description of how she attacked the enemy one time around would often take in excess of 2 minutes. All before she knew if her attack had succeeded or not. She was also a massive mooch. In several months of playing with her, taking road trips to neighboring games every other week, she never once paid for her own food. Her funds were wrapped up in her bank overseas. You see, she had just returned from teaching abroad for a semester, and had neglected to renew her work visa while there, and so had returned to the US after less than a year. I later found out that the work visa forms had given her severe anxiety, so she had simply opted not to fill them out, because she was sure that they would make an exception for her, and clearly wouldn't kick her out of the country for not filling out paperwork. Anyways, myself and my friends gave her a thorough rundown of the system, and the pack power structure. She made her character, and we were ready to roll. Prior to leaving on this trip, she had asked that she be allowed to drive. Her grandmother had just bought her a vehicle, her first, and she had just gotten her license, so she was excited to take it on a road trip. It was a 3-hour drive to this game, and the rest of us had been driving there for nearly 6 months, so we were happy to let someone else take a turn behind the wheel. Of course, we covered her gas and her meals during the stops because her funds were still tied up by international banking regulations. Immediately upon arriving at the game, we were introduced to a scene where it became evident that one of the local players had formed an infernal pact, so directly into the deep end our newest player and pack member went. We investigated, confirmed the information, and confronted the infernalist character. Immediately, Kathy took charge, and by taking charge, I mean she halted the dialogue taking place, turned to me, the pack priest, and informed me that I was no longer needed, and she would be handling this moving forward. While I was thrilled to see her taking a more active approach in her roleplay, we had previously informed her of the pack power structure. As a newly embraced vampire, she had very little authority in the Sabbat society. As the pack priest and a fully fledged inquisitor, my character undeniably had more. I politely informed her that I would not be leaving, that this interrogation was my purview, and that she should stand silently for the remainder of the interrogation or leave. A bit harsh, I admit, but definitely in character for an elder vampire that had just been insulted and had their authority damaged by a child. In a huff, Kathy left the room. Combat ensued, and we eventually won. At that point, we exited into the hallway, where Kathy was in hysterical tears, being comforted by several players and members of the ST staff. We arrived in time to hear her say that I had basically kidnapped her and forced her to drive us over 3 hours against her will, just to remove her from the scene and place her in timeout in the hallway like a child. She saw me and immediately informed me that moving forward, I would be required to tell her what my character is thinking, his motivations, and all information pertaining to his actions at all times. So, and I quote, "I'll know you don't hate me, so I don't have an anxiety attack." She stated that this was only fair. I responded that I would be happy to roleplay with her in character, and that she was welcome to ask me those questions directly, but that I may or may not respond honestly, because Vampire is a game of political intrigue, and lying is the name of the game. She demanded a position of authority within the pack, and that she be made into a full Inquisitor immediately as recompense for forcing her to drive us across the state, and then making her sit outside in the hallway for 2 hours, though it had only been 20 minutes. By comparison, myself and the other Inquisitors had been playing weekly for over a year to achieve our positions. We de-escalated the situation, but it was a very long, awkward car ride home. Shortly thereafter, Kathy left the pack to join the pack of a not-so-secret infernalist who offered her a position in the Inquisition if she would teach him her clan's unique discipline, and that ended about as well as you might think. TLDR: entitled new player demands that we cheat and provide her with meta information to placate her anxiety, accuses me of kidnapping her and forcing her to be our Uber after demanding that she be the driver for the trip. Now, I'm not too well versed in Vampire the Masquerade, or LARPing for that matter, but I don't think that knowledge is really required to analyze this story. By the sounds of it, Kathy is the type to want to have other people do stuff for her, and doesn't take responsibility in her own life. Especially if the not filling out paperwork to stay teaching abroad is any indication. It sounds like the Vampire LARP is much like any tabletop RPG, where you play to level up, and she was new, but wanted to be the same level as the other players that were doing it for over a year. So her role-playing the talking down to a character that was much higher in the hierarchy. I don't blame OP for doing what he did, as everyone was role-playing. But to then take it seriously, go out in the hallway and accuse OP and the others of forcing her to drive them there when she insisted on doing so is super fucked up. And like OP said, I'm sure the awkwardness of that ride home was palpable. But let's move on. Please don't blow up the store because you misheard me. By Reddit user, Wise Cactus. While this happened ages ago, and I should be over it, I still feel a little frustration about what happened, so I'm just going to get it out here. The important people in this story are as follows. Me, newbie DM running a campaign for the first time. Boyfriend, the usual DM of our games, and my boyfriend, though that part is mostly irrelevant beyond the nickname for this story. Mr. TNT, the problem player. I was running my first campaign, a combination of Lost Mine of Fandelver and Icespire Peak, and I just got done with introducing the two villains and how they connect to the party. After the encounter, everyone returns to Phandalin and they start buying and selling their stuff. I have said before that I am allowing dynamite from the Dungeon Master's Guide to be used, though looking back on it, I should have made it the bombs due to lore reasons. And I had the bright idea of selling the dynamite to Mr. TNT. This was an awful idea, as I would later learn. In that same session, Mr. TNT decided that he wanted to sell his mithril chain armor, so he went to the blacksmith, and I quickly did some calculations to determine the price. I decided on 110 GP, and I tell this to Mr. TNT in character. He starts asking for the price to be raised, and I, unaware of the issue, and just thinking that he is role-playing his character's greedy nature, return with a rebuttal appropriate to the character. No, I won't raise the price. Take it or leave it. He then proceeds to take out the dynamite. I began to get nervous here, as I'm new to DMing, and I was thrust into a situation that I wasn't prepared for, since how many guides are there to handling terrorism in D&D? I, while internally panicking, tried to stick to how I think the character would react, and told Mr. TNT to bring it on, as the blacksmith was a tough woman, and has probably handled such things before. This was foolish of me. I assumed that he would back down, but Mr. TNT did not back down. He escalated. He lit the match and was about to throw it into the store. Two players, including one whose character was with Mr. TNT to keep him in check, stayed silent, while another one encouraged Mr. TNT to blow up the store because funny gas explosion. Now, this is probably the part that some will say is a red flag at worst, but I tried to salvage the situation by basically lashing out. A rocks fall and everyone dies kind of approach in order to prevent it. I told him to take back his action or make a new character, and this starts an argument between Mr. TNT and I. This is when Boyfriend comes in. He knows how to DM and was trying to defuse the issue as much as he could. He was on my side mostly, but he did agree with Mr. TNT that I could have handled the situation better. And then the stinger comes out. Mr. TNT thought I made the price 10 GP and didn't want to start an argument. I told him he can just ask me to repeat the price and there wouldn't be an argument if he did. After this, at Boyfriend's call, we ended the session. Mr. TNT dropped out of the campaign right afterwards without really elaborating too much on the other reasons other than this argument on why, and also didn't give me any suggestions on how to improve. And I was so crushed that I just canceled the campaign. While I now know that there are ways that I could have handled it better, and Boyfriend gave me ways I could have done so, it still stings to have your first go end like that, and it even hurt my confidence on DMing. Maybe getting this post out there will give me the release I need to try again, but who knows. But if I do get out there, I know for damn sure that I'm typing every price instead of speaking it from now on. I think that OP is being a bit too hard on themselves here. It was their first time DMing, and that player probably knew that. For a player to go all murder hobo on a first-time Dungeon Master's game, all because a blacksmith wouldn't budge on a price, is kind of a dick move. And the excuse of, "I thought you said 10 GP, I think is probably bullshit. I think that the player was probably just trying to save face and shift his actions to being the DM's fault. Though, that is just my thoughts. Hopefully OP does get the motivation to try DMing again. Let's move on. The Good, the Rogue, and the Sorcerer by Reddit user Ada the Trusting. Years ago, in my youthful days of inexperience, in a 3rd edition game, or maybe 3.5, it's been a minute, 2 clowns taught me about how people use and abuse alignment. The game was a long-running adventure, with 5 of us traveling through a corny trope-ridden land. We were 15. Don't judge us too harshly for having inventor gnomes, dwarven blacksmiths, and flying mounts as a common rental service. We were seeking magical artifacts to assemble into a weapon that can defeat the great evil of prophecy. Standard stuff. This story is about 2 players who were in that game, and I'll talk about the rogue first. Most of the party was some flavor of good, but this was my first encounter with the dreaded, chaotic neutral dumbass trope. And, unfortunately, it's probably the worst one I've ever had. The player's primary agenda in the game was causing trouble everywhere he went, often with little motivating factor beyond someone looking at him wrong, something seeming funny, and or, "My character is an anarchist, and this is what he'd do." The guy had absolutely no idea what anarchism is, to be clear. The party spent significant portions of the game putting out the literal fires and trying to get things back to normal after the rogue did something dumb. What made this particularly frustrating was the DM just sitting around, being amused by this, and then eventually saying, "Alright, you fixed the situation," and everything just goes back to exactly the same way it was before the rogue did anything, effectively just wasting hours of our time. On the other side of the spectrum, we had the sorcerer. The guy was true neutral, and this essentially meant that he'd stand in the back and watch quietly while the rest of the party did everything, occasionally throwing out ineffectual damage spells in combat. At times, he wouldn't even involve himself in events. The party would be running out of the tavern to stop the rogue from viciously murdering a theater troupe in the street, and the sorcerer would just pointedly just remain in the tavern and not help because, "I don't want to get involved. It goes against my nature of maintaining balance." This was, as you might imagine, annoying as hell, and caused more than a few arguments where the player just didn't understand what our problem was. This would all come to a head when, about 4 months into the campaign, and when the rest of us were getting somewhat tired of the other 2, we'd find ourselves ascending some mountain temple or other in order to clear out the local cult to the great evil. After a few rough fights and being drained of resources, except, of course, for the goddamn sorcerer who used a whole 4 spell slots between the 2 lethal combats we had, we'd find ourselves face to face with an evil champion of the big bad. At 6th level, Our party would normally be able to mop the floor with a single guy pretty easily, and we still probably could, but we were kind of second-guessing ourselves since our resources were all low. On top of this, the party was kind of tired in general, having put up with Rogue getting us ambushed and an already too long session, with 2 grinding and tediously similar fights against cultists and summoned beast. And so it was at this dramatically appropriate point that the sorcerer, out of fucking nowhere and with zero foreshadowing, would announce that his true alignment this whole time had been evil, and he would then proclaim his undying allegiance to the great evil and go stand next to the champion dude. In retrospect, I feel a little bad about our reaction to this, but where I assume he and the DM expected to see shock, indignation, and outrage over this months-long planned betrayal, we all collectively just rolled our eyes and released a sigh of exasperation, accompanied with a single annoyed, "Man, what?" Things were now worse for us, knowing that the pointlessly traitorous ass had most of his spells still available, but we might still be able to do something about it. And it was at that point that the rogue announced that while we were distracted by this revelation, that he would be doing a sneak attack on our cleric. Now shocked, indignant, and outraged, we asked what the fuck, and he said that as he saw it, the only way to get out of this alive was to join the sorcerer in the heel turn, and that, you guessed it, it's what his character would do. We didn't even play out the combat at that point. Between the frustration and exhaustion, we just didn't care. We called it a win for evil, milled around for a few minutes to finish off the pizza we ordered in grim silence, and awkwardly left. Unshockingly, we never continued the game. The GM was pretty peeved at us for a while for quitting, saying that he worked really hard on making that twist interesting, and that we were being unreasonable. Funnily enough, I'm good friends with the sorcerer player to this day, and he's since told me that he just feels bad about that entire game, and that he just got railroaded into being a dick by the GM, suggesting that he do the secret evil PC thing, and that it's gonna be a great twist. The GM eventually got over himself too, and we continued to play RPGs together, though under new leadership, for a good few years until we lost touch, and we collectively agreed to just never allow evil PCs at the table again, a rule that I uphold to this day. I never saw the rogue player again, and that's just fine by me. While betrayal like what happened in the story can be a fun twist in a tabletop RPG, the way that the players and the DM went about it wasn't the best. First, the rogue player was just a straight-up murder hobo, which ate up time and was annoying to the other players, and a good DM wouldn't let that go on for too long. Though, it sounded like this wasn't a good DM, as it seems like he was basically telling Sorcerer how to play his character, so he could spring that surprise on all the players. And I can't say that I'm surprised that the rogue would also turn heel if his past actions were any indication. It doesn't surprise me to hear that the campaign ended there, though it is good to hear that they restructured things and were able to continue playing other ones. And that is all we have for today. If you have a story that you would like to be featured in a video, be sure to post it to the D&D Doge subreddit, link it in the comments, or even contact me on Twitter. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may all of your rolls be natural 20s. Until next time.